Visions of the Black Heaven, written by Daniel Zien, read by Daniel Zien. Chapter 29. Melody was singing a tune as they were cleaning the dishes. As she hums a high note, Lynette notices a movement out of the corner of her eye. She sees spilled salt granules from the table floating over the table surface, forming a rotating three-dimensional pattern. It rotated in all aspects of the figure. Lynette started singing in harmony. The salt developed a much bigger, complex three-dimensional diagram. Duke and Thor came into the house carrying wood for the next day. They saw the salt granules floating in the air. The men just stopped and watched. Astonished, Melody stopped singing, and the granules immediately fell to the table. "What was that?" Melody asked. "That," Lynette said, "was the result of resonant cymatics." "Resonant what?" Melody said. "What is that?" "Well, it's easier to show you than to try to explain. So let's try this," Lynette said. "Do it again, but this time we will raise our pitch to create another sound." Lynette nodded in agreement. They sang a sound and slowly raised their pitch until the granules moved, again elevating over the table, forming a different pattern. Both women clapped their hands and laughed in glee. "It worked!" "Well," Lynette said, "cymatics is a different concept to understand. We really do not know how it works, but we know it does because we can successfully repeat the experiment. See, certain sounds have a physical resonance energy pattern that can be shown through grains of sand or salt as they vibrate on a two-dimensional platform. I have never seen where the grains just float in the air in a three-dimensional form." Lynette looked at Melody. "I wonder, let's try something with the medallions. Remember what the voices said? All the answers are here. All we have to do is find them." They found a magnifying glass, putting the fiber-coated medallions on one side and lined the gold medallions up next to them for a closer one to comparison. After lining the gold medallions in several different configurations, Melody noticed something. "Look at this." Melody pointed to the back of the medallion. Every medallion shows a moon. One was a crescent moon, another was a quarter moon, another was a half moon, and there's a full moon, like that of a harvest moon. There must be a connection here somewhere. I know when I'm working at the hospital, everyone is aware of the full moon effect. The patients are always more irritable than normal. It's like the full moon has an effect on people." Lynette thought for a second. She was thinking, "Well, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. See, the moon is always there. The only difference is the amount of sunlight reflecting off the moon's surface. It is as if the increase or decrease of light has a certain effect on something that people can pick up on." Now, Lynette had nudged a gold medallion towards the fiber-coated medallion without noticing. A strange light glowed from the medallions. She looked up and saw the back of 4 men radiating in energy, each man holding a flaming sword, the men surrounding them as if they were being guarded. In the corners of the room were groups of faceless, shadowed figures. The dark figures were not cowering in fear of the angelic garrison, but avoiding the incisive power of the flaming sword. Melody could feel the shadow beings scowl in anger and displeasure. Several shadows made advances toward the women. The hedge of lighted beings altered their stance to fend off the shadows' advance. Their coruscating swords did not seem to be a device held in their hands, but rather to emanate from their arms. The energy protruded from their anatomy. "Melody," nudged Lynette, "do you see this also?" "Yeah," she said, shivering in uncertainty, noticing one faceless form staring at her. One of the lighted beings turned around, his shimmering eyes focused on Lynette. With a thunderous voice, he said, "Your safety is assured." Elohim has many more waiting to join us in protecting you. We always see you, but you never see us. When you seem to need us, call out to Elohim. Your cries will be answered. Lynette was astonished, moving to get away from the strange light, stumbled into the table separating the connected medallions. The light vanished. The images faded. The women looked at each other in disbelief of what they just saw. After a few moments of regrouping, they continued their conversation. Lynette whispered, I remember a paper I read once where the speed of rotation of atoms was the distinguishing factor in the speed of energy. Quoting Tesla, Lynette said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibrations. The moon is 1/4 of the size of the Earth. Yet there's a connection between the Earth and the moon's gravitational pull. The moon affects the Earth's oceans. However, the Earth's gravitational force affects the moon also. What if there's a connection between the medallions and the dimensions? A connection between the positions of the planet? Why else would there be such a clear, detailed example of celestial planet positioning on the medallions? We know that there is a correlation between the planets and the solar system. Do you remember the hoopla about the Mayan 2012 planetary alignment? The year 2012 was supposed to be the end of the world as we know it, due to the gravitational pull of the planetary alignment. What if the gravitational force of the planets has nothing to do with the effect of the dimensions? What if there's something else affecting all this? What could that be? We know there are 10 different dimensions, 4 dimensions that we're aware of: breadth, depth, height, and length. We know that length means time. There is no time outside of our dimensions. As a scientist, I had to look at the Occam razor effect. The simplest answer is usually the correct one. Let's look at this. I have to wonder if other dimensions have their own parallel paths or orbits also, if they rotate as our solar system does. Our solar system rotates around the universe at 1 degree every 72 years. It takes our solar system 25,980 years to make one complete rotation around the universe. Now, understanding that, what if there were 12 different types of conditions in our universe, like the zodiac signs, which in our solar system goes through every celestial cycle? That would mean there are differing types of elements in our universe. Lynette thought for a moment, wondering what was the best way to describe this concept. Have you ever seen waves of energy around a magnet, when the iron shavings are sprinkled on a piece of paper over a magnet? Everyone nodded their head yes. Okay, let's assume that there are waves of energy as different dimensions around our Earth, equal to the magnetic rings around a magnetized object. We would have to change the frequency of energy to attain that different dimension, or different ring of energy around the magnet. Look at this stone cabin. It is surrounded with a combination of crystals mounted on stone pedestals. We have crystals in the walls, in our pockets. We have the effect of crystals creating a division in the frequency of energy in the Earth's electromagnetic field, opening up or even closing dimensions. Everyone wants to know what the space between spaces means. Well, there's no way of telling when we use words, but quantum physics uses mathematics. 10 to the negative 33 cubic centimeters is the definition of non-locality. In effect, creating a space between spaces. At this point, there is no location. Only protons exist. What is so unusual about all this is that protons are aware of where and what other protons are doing across the entire universe. Likewise, time cannot be any shorter than 10 to the minus 43 seconds. So how could there be space between spaces? Well, why not? Nothing else makes sense here. Might as well break that law of physics also. There must be a way of identifying the different dimensions through the cycle of energies. even though when I think of quantum physics, there is no valid, straight, solid laws. Everything's backwards. This is like large quantum physics experiment. Melody gave Lynette a puzzled look. Thor had a blank look in his face. Lynette sat and thought for a few more moments. What if our Earth in the solar system makes subtle changes as it travels around the universe? Or the elements that our Earth travels through changes, and the laws of physics do not act the same way as they do in other areas of the universe. If we can only detect the slightest change every 72 years, we understand that a lot can change in 72 years that we would only accredit it to progress. But what if it was not progress? Not at all, but really the change in our frequency that made us or our environment change. Think about it. The pyramids in Giza, Egypt, are 445 feet tall. But the Mesoamerican pyramids in Central America are 330 feet tall, and about 1/3 of the size of the Giza pyramid. What does that tell us? That from the time of construction of the Giza pyramid to the time of construction of the Mesoamerican pyramid, several thousand years have passed. Has the Doppler effect of electromagnetic energy changed that much? Man's ability has apparently diminished exactly 1/3 as before when the first pyramids were constructed. Okay, Lynette said, let's take this one step farther. Have you heard of the zodiac signs? Melody nodded her head yes. Okay, good. The zodiac signs, in Earth's time, each sign is 30 days long. There are 12 signs in a year. This has been around for thousands of years. Each sign is defined as having the subtle differences in personalities of people. What creates these subtle differences in personalities of people? The zodiac signs are based on cycles. Each cycle is 30 days, 12 signs for 12 months. What would happen if there was a larger celestial cycle, which 1 degree is 72 years, for 30 degrees to be 2160 years, a full celestial cycle, 25,920 years? What differences we have to notice for us to understand where we are in that celestial cycle. Melody whispered, the changes would happen so slowly we could not perceive the changes as we see the differences in archaeological design, structures, and patterns. Lynette sat thinking deeply. There must be a connection somewhere between the medallions and what's going on. Melody stood up and said, I need to relax. All this talk has me all tight and frustrated. I need to walk. So let's find the men and see what's outside. They found the men outside cutting wood and gathering food. Melody walked up to Duke and said, let's take a walk. Okay, sounds good to me, Duke laughed. Lynette stood next to Thor, slid her hand into his. He smiled as he looked down into her eyes. She smiled back and gently squeezed his hand. Melody started telling Duke what happened in the cabin. Seeing the garrison of the 4 angels protecting them and the other 4 shadowy figures in the corners, being held back by the 4 lighted beings. Thor whispered to Duke, we need to start to consider a plan to protect ourselves in the event that we are visited by someone we really don't want to see. Duke thought of the Schroeders. Yeah, you're right, we need to prepare. Duke walked over to a downed tree, picked up a straight branch, swung it like a staff. Melody, ever used one of these before? Ha! Are you kidding? Melody laughed. I was taught by one of the best martial arts teachers known to man, my brother Caleb. Remember? Melody took the staff from Duke, started to twirl it. Lynette watched as Melody expertly swung the staff in front of her, behind her, then a figure 8 style side to side. Oh, I wish I could do that, Lynette whispered. Sure you can, Melody laughed. Here, I'll show you. Melody stood behind Lynette, showing her how to stand. Put her feet planted the width of her shoulders. to place her hands together, back to back, resting the staff comfortably in her hands, spinning the staff around, letting the staff make one revolution, then catching the staff with her thumb and spinning the staff around again. Lynette understood how to spin the staff. After a few minutes, she was spinning the staff like a pro. "Wow," Melody said, "you catch on fast. I'll show you something." Melody swung the staff in an arch, coming down toward her imaginary attacker's knee. Melody snarled, "Hard to fight when you can't walk." Then she swung toward the imaginary shoulder. "Hard to fight when you can't swing your arms." Then she attacked her attacker's thorax. "Can't fight when you can't breathe. Here, I'll show you how to swing behind your back." Thor walked off into the foliage looking for something. He had an uneasy feeling. The lights in the corner of his eyes were flashing brightly. He stopped to listen. He only heard the natural sounds of the forest. Yet, off behind the sound, he heard nothing. It was like there was something in the distance spooking the wildlife. Thor caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance. It was big, dark, fast, and quiet. He watched the figure until it vanished into the shadows. Alarmed, he turned around and headed back to the others. Lynette was still swinging her staff and laughing with glee. The actions felt natural. "I never thought I could do something like this." "We need to get back," Thor whispered. "There's something out there. I did not get a real good look at it. I know it was not the one we saw last night. This was a different one. We need to make plans for the inevitable." "Yeah, I know," Duke whispered. "We will address this tonight." Everyone went back into the cabin. Melody said, "We've been thinking, Duke. There has to be something more in the cave. Let's go back in and look again." Duke looked at Thor in agreement. "Yeah, we can do that." They brought the candle and headed up to their loft, touching the rock to the cave entrance. A gush of fresh air, like an afternoon zephyr, fluttered out of the entrance. Everyone walked in the cave entrance as Duke put the candle in the crystal platform on top of the stairs. Walking down the 12 stone stairs, Lynette was still amazed when the billions of points of light shimmering in the cave's ceiling and walls when the candle was placed upon the crystal. It was like going into the darkest part of the world and looking up into a clear night sky. The stars looked so close, yet they seemed like one could touch them. Looking behind the stone steps, they found a large wooden box, which had been hidden in the shadows. The time-worn chest was about 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet high. The wood had the same kind of light tone with dark rings as the rest of the furniture was made of. Duke slowly lifted the wooden lid. Inside, an array of ancient artifacts came into view. Large bronze helmets, circular silver shields, axe heads, metal arrowheads, spearheads, several beautiful daggers and metal sheaths decorated with gems. Thor chose a dagger, closely examining it. The dull silver metal sheath was smooth, yet it had a granular finish. The sheath opening encrusted with a variety of multicolored gems he had never seen before. The blade made a tinny noise of metal scraping metal as he pulled the dagger out of its sheath. The metal blade had a particular texture. The metal was polished to a glossy finish, yet the metal had a grainy appearance. Twisting the blade in the light, he saw the metal finish had a more unique sheen than the other ancient weapons he had seen. He had a strong interest in weapons of ancient hand-to-hand combat. The dagger looked like a fallen star sword, a double-edged blade which history claims was made from the metal of a meteorite. Thor always questioned that statement. The fallen star sword was recorded before man had any metal forging knowledge. Maybe this was the explanation he was looking for. The wooden handle was made for a hand much larger than his, and had what looked like to be splotches of dark discoloration on the wooden handle and metal. returning the blade to its sheath. He thought, "This is a weapon of close combat. These stains must be dried blood, but whose or what? Man or animal?" Thor put the dagger down. Duke found 3 large silver rings. Each ring had different writing on the edges, and one silver sash made of a series of many silver links. Laughingly handed one to Melody and Thor and gave the sash to Lynette, then put one of the larger rings in his head. He felt dizzy. He felt funny, disoriented. He seemed to stumble, and then felt like he went from a dark room to the warmth of a bright sunlight. He knew his body had changed somehow. Melody and Lynette watched as Duke took a step. It was like he walked out of one dimension into another. His body and his clothes changed instantly. He became 3 feet taller. He was wearing a burlap and leather outfit with a silver shield on his chest. Thor put the silver ring on his head. He felt dizzy, stumbled, and changed also. Melody saw the silver metal ring with the same strange kind of writing on the outside as the medallions. Instinctively, she put the last one on her head. Melody felt disoriented, stumbled, and then she felt her body and mind change. Now Lynette was short. Melody was the size as Duke and Thor. Melody was amazed that she could see sound and hear light. The others panicked as Melody suddenly became invisible. Melody saw the other 3 in slow motion. They could not see her as she moved. She saw lines of light and energy following past her. She moved so quickly the others vanished. Melody thought she was moving at the speed of sound. Lynette looked at the elegant sash. It was very light, made of thousands of tiny links forming a 6-inch wide by 3-foot long silver loop. Looking up into Thor's eyes, Lynette trustingly put the silver sash over her head. It rested over her right shoulder and on her left hip. She felt the artifact embrace her as a strange energy pulsated through her body as it tingled. Her mind felt dizzy, disoriented. She fell a few steps forward, looking up. She realized that she was the same height as the others, wearing similar clothes of burlap and metal armor. Lynette felt a warmth inside of her head, a warmth she had never experienced. She instinctively lowered her head. She felt her mind focusing on a rock several hundred feet away. Feeling the tingling flowing through her body, she knew what was going to happen next. The tingling focused into a beam of energy emitted from her forehead, causing the rock she was focusing on to explode into 1,000 small, tiny pebbles. Lynette was amazed, thinking to herself and speaking to the others. This metal must be some type of synthetic biomolecular substance designed to accentuate our natural capabilities. It looks like metal. It feels like metal, but it cannot be metal. A metal we are familiar with. I feel more clever, stronger, courageous, creative. Things just seem clearer. I sense my capabilities without thinking. My body reacts without my mind needing to reason. My mind feels like it's growing, expanding. Maybe I'm now using all my DNA from my dormant parts of my brain. Or maybe the non-active DNA has been activated. This metal must be a rare heavy metal like neodymium, which allows the free flow of electrons and protons, allowing the free flow of time, space, and energy. This would change the structure of everything around us, including the bioelectric makeup of our bodies. How would this work? It must be the protons are affected by the electromagnetic field, then resonating through our brains and pineal gland, which is powered by our heart and brain, through our blood supply, and then into our body. The change in electric flow must enable us to achieve total usage of our brains and our DNA. Before leaving, Thor grabbed 2 knives, one for him and one for Duke. The artifacts felt natural, like they were meant to wear them. They walked back up the cave stairs into the cabin. Then Duke understood why the cabin was built so large. The doorway was large enough for everyone to walk through. Duke looked at the others and said, "There's something we have to do." The four walked outside to a corner of the property. They stood by a 9-foot tall stone pedestal looking down on the stone structure. Lynette noticed the 3 large open geodes on top of the stone's platform. Lynette gasped. "This is fascinating." "Yeah," Duke said. "There are a total of 4 stone posts, one at each corner of the property. Each one has 3 large geodes on their platforms. Each geode is a different type, color, size, and texture," Lynette whispered. "The combination of crystalline elements of the geodes and the Earth's magnetic field, along with the specific positioning of the posts, the elevation, size, kinds of the geodes must be a unique effect. This is like a complicated combination of natural elements releasing these powers. It's evident the cabin is here, yet for some reason last night's intruders could not see the cabin. It must be that the emerging of the 12 different types of crystalline elements combined together with the Earth's magnetic field produces an effect to offset the natural definitions of our dimensions. We must be in a different dimension now. The frequency of energy must define dimensions. We know that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be modified and changed." Lynette looked at Melody. "That is why they could not see the cabin from their perspective. The cabin was not there." Lynette hesitated in contemplative thought. "If the cabin was not there, then where are we?" Walking around the outside of the cabin, they saw the stumps of 24 trees that Grandpa had used to make the arch of the loft. Duke whispered, "I spent many summers here, and I've never seen those before." Lynette looked at the foliage. There were no plants she remembered studying in college. Every plant looked foreign to her. They hesitated for a moment. The sounds of the birds were different. No one could remember hearing the screech of a bird call. The screech made the birds sound much bigger than the birds at home. Thor walked off into the foliage, hesitated, listened to the silence of the forest. He heard a strange silence behind the bird calls. Thor looked off into the distance, seeing the same shining light in the corner of his vision, like something or someone was trying to get his attention. Every time that shining light occurs, something important or dangerous was about to happen. Thor looks at Duke. "I have a funny feeling about this, buddy. Let's get back into the cabin." Lynette stood looking at the stands with the geodes. This is not what they taught us in college. But how could she argue with reality? She was in the middle of something she could not explain. "Hang on," she said as she lowered her head and focused on a rock a few hundred feet away. It exploded in a bursting power of pebbles. They headed back into the cabin. Inside the cabin, Lynette started talking. "I have never heard of anything like this before." Thor pulled Duke aside. "Something's wrong here. I can feel it. I see it. Do you remember I told you about the shining lights in the corner of my eyes? Well, they're shining like the 4th of July right now. Something's going to happen, and happen fast. We have to be ready." "Agreed," Duke answered, as they listened to Lynette talk about the physics of quantum entanglement, of being in 2 places at once that no one understood. Duke and Thor turned toward the front door.